The morning sun hung low over Fort Harlington, its light glinting off the chain-link fences and security booths that marked the edge of the base. A few soldiers in crisp digital camo laughed near the checkpoint, coffee in hand. While a black sedan rolled up slowly to the entry lane, inside sat an older black man, 65, wearing a faded red shirt beneath a weathered gray jacket. His hands were steady on the wheel, his eyes calm but tired, the kind of eyes that had seen too much and carried it quietly. He pulled up to the gate ID. "Sir," said Corporal Ryan Briggs, a young security guard who couldn't have been more than 20. He looked half bored, half cocky, the kind of attitude that comes from routine and authority mixed together. The old man handed over his license. "Morning sun," he said softly. Ryan squinted at the card. "Civilian, you've got base clearance." The old man's voice was steady. "I was invited to the memorial ceremony. Commander Lewis should have cleared me." Ryan tapped the license against his clipboard and smirked. "Memorial, huh? You sure you're at the right place, sir? This base ain't open to the public." Behind Ryan, another guard, Private Moore, leaned out of the booth, grinning. "Maybe he just wants a selfie with the jets." The men laughed lightly. The old man didn't react. He simply folded his hands and waited. Ryan felt an odd tension under that quiet stare. Something about the man's composure, the unshakable patience, made his own tone sharpen. "I'm gonna need you to turn around," Sir Ryan said. "This is restricted access." "I told you," the old man replied, calm but firmer now. "Commander Lewis invited me. He'll confirm it," Moore chuckled. "Commander Lewis doesn't invite random civilians to military ceremonies." "Yeah," Ryan added, waving the ID, "you're not even in the system. So unless you got some kind of secret password, you're not getting past this gate." For a moment, the base traffic noise faded, the sound of drills, vehicles, and a distant flag raising. The old man leaned slightly forward, eyes on Ryan. Then he said quietly, "Iron Shade." Ryan froze. The words hit like a physical force, unfamiliar yet heavy. Moore's grin faltered. What did you just say?" Ryan asked. "Iron Shade," the old man repeated, his voice low, unwavering. "Tell Commander Lewis that Iron Shade is at the gate." Ryan blinked, uncertain. Moore laughed nervously. That's supposed to mean something. But when Ryan picked up the radio to call dispatch, his hands trembled slightly. There was something about the man's tone, the certainty, that made the air feel different. He pressed the call button. "Dispatch, is Gate 2. Got a civilian here claiming to be invited by Commander Lewis, says a code phrase, Iron Shade. You copy." Silence crackled on the line. Then a voice came back, sharp, alert. "Gate 2, repeat that phrase." Ryan did. The radio hissed, then the same voice said, almost whispering, "Hold your position. Do not detain him. Commander Lewis is on his way." Ryan exchanged a confused glance with Moore. Commander Lewis never came to the gate himself. Never. The old man sat quietly in the driver's seat, eyes on the flag fluttering above the base. When Commander Lewis arrived 5 minutes later, in a black SUV, every guard straightened. The commander stepped out, saw the man in the car, and his expression changed instantly from confusion to disbelief. He walked straight to the sedan, saluted, and said, "Sir, it's an honor to see you again." The young guards stood frozen. The old man nodded once, stepped out slowly, and returned the salute with a quiet, precise motion that spoke of habit long buried. Ryan's mouth went dry. "Sir?" he stammered, looking at Lewis. Who is he?" Lewis didn't take his eyes off the veteran. "You don't know who you're speaking to, Corporal. That man is Colonel Raymond Holt, codenamed Iron Shade, the man who saved 43 soldiers when Operation Halcyon went dark." The air around the gate went still. Ryan's face turned pale as realization set in. The old man, the one they'd laughed at, had been a legend. The silence that followed could have drowned out the roaring jets above. Ryan lowered his head, unsure what to do with his hands, his face flushing with shame. The other guards suddenly looked very small beside the man they'd just mocked. Commander Lewis broke the stillness. "Let him through. Personally escort him to Building 9. "Yes, sir," Ryan managed, voice unsteady as the old man Colonel Raymond Holt walked past the checkpoint. The base security gate lifted with a metallic groan that sounded almost like an apology. Holt didn't speak, didn't gloat, didn't even look back at the guards. He simply adjusted the cuff of his gray jacket and started walking toward the parade field. Lewis followed beside him, trying to hide the emotion in his voice. "Sir, we thought you'd never set foot on a base again." "After I didn't plan to," Holt said quietly. His eyes drifted toward a banner flapping in the wind ahead. Fort Harlington Memorial, honoring fallen heroes of Operation Halcyon. That operation's name carried weight. It wasn't on record, not in any official debriefs. It existed in whispers among veterans, coded memories, half-raced files. Men who came back from it never spoke of what happened in the dunes of Assar Valley, the ambush, the blackout, the missing soldiers. Only one call sign survived the reports: Iron Shade. Lewis hesitated, then spoke softly. "The men still talk about you, sir. Some of them owe their lives." Holt stopped walking. His gaze fell to the concrete beneath his boots. "They owe me nothing. The ones who didn't make it, they're the ones who deserve to be remembered." Lewis swallowed hard. "You're being too modest, sir." "I'm not." Holt turned, eyes piercing yet calm. "I gave orders that got men killed. No medal or salute changes that they walked on in silence until they reached Building 9, a low rectangular structure near the memorial lawn. Inside, a small crowd had gathered. Officers, family members of the fallen, and a handful of journalists setting up cameras. When Holt stepped in, conversations faded mid-sentence. Heads turned. No one had expected him to actually show. A young lieutenant whispered to another, "That's Iron Shade. He's still alive." Holt ignored the murmurs. He approached the memorial wall, black granite, etched with hundreds of names. His hand, calloused and steady, brushed over one line in particular, Captain Aaron Lewis. His throat tightened. "That's my father," he said quietly. "He served under you." "I know," Holt murmured. "He was a good man. Better than me." The younger Lewis tried to speak, but Holt's calm sadness silenced him. The room fell still again. Then an older general entered, Major General Douglas, gray-haired and stoic. The crowd parted for him instinctively. When he saw Holt, his jaw clenched. "Iron Shade," Douglas said, not unkindly, but with the weight of memory. "Didn't think I'd ever see you on my base again." Holt turned, offering a respectful nod. "I didn't think I'd ever be invited." Douglas stepped closer, voice dropping. "You weren't, but I'm glad you came." The air between them carried decades of unspoken history. Trust broken, missions buried, men lost. "Welcome home, Colonel." Holt looked at it for a long moment, then shook it. Outside the building, Ryan stood at attention near the gate, still replaying the moment over and over. More pale and shaken, finally broke the silence. "Iron Shade. You think that was some kind of code name?" Ryan nodded slowly. "Yeah, but not just any code name. My dad used to talk about a guy who led a rescue when everyone else thought the mission was lost. Said he moved like a shadow, saved dozens without losing his cool." Moore swallowed. "That's him." "That's him," Ryan said, "and we treated him like some lost old man." They stood there for a long time, shame mixing with awe. Back inside the hall, the ceremony began. Douglas took the podium and spoke of duty, honor, and sacrifice. But as he reached the closing lines, his voice softened. "There's someone here today whose name doesn't appear on this wall, but whose actions made sure many of these men returned home. A man who carried the burden of silence for decades. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Raymond Holt." Applause rose across the room. It wasn't thunderous, it was reverent. Holt didn't want to speak. He hadn't come for recognition. But when the crowd looked at him with respect instead of curiosity, he felt a quiet duty to address them one last time. He walked to the podium, placed both hands on it, and looked across the sea of faces. "I wasn't supposed to survive," he began. "None of us were. Operation Halcyon wasn't a mission, it was a sentence. They sent us into the dark, and only shadows came back." A ripple of silence spread through the audience. Even Douglas looked uneasy. "We weren't heroes," Holt continued. "We were soldiers doing what we were told. The heroes are the ones who didn't come home." He paused, looking at the names on the wall. "When the ambush came, I made a call that saved 4, but it cost us 12. I see their faces every night. That's why I never wore the uniform again." A pin could have dropped. Then he looked toward Lewis. "Your father was one of the best men I ever served with. I promised him I'd tell you someday why he never came home. Tears welled in Lewis's eyes. Holt's voice softened. He died buying us the few minutes we needed to get the wounded out. He knew what it meant. He didn't hesitate. I've carried that with me since the room was utterly still. Then the crowd rose, slowly, respectfully, one by one. Every officer, every soldier, even Douglas stood at attention and saluted. Holt bowed his head once, a tear cutting through years of composure. When the ceremony ended, the crowd drifted out in solemn silence. Some lingered near the memorial, whispering about the old colonel who'd returned from the dead. Others simply stood still, unsure what to say in the presence of living history. Commander Lewis remained near the podium, his jaw tight. The words Holt had spoken about his father burned in his chest, grief and pride woven into one unbearable knot. He turned, meaning to thank Holt again, but the old veteran was already slipping quietly out a side door. Lewis caught up with him in the hallway. "Sir, wait." Holt stopped, his hand resting on the doorframe. "You don't owe me thanks, son." "I'm not thanking you," Lewis said. "I'm asking you to stay. The general wants to debrief." "Debrief." Holt smiled faintly without humor. "After 32 years, it's not about interrogation. There are reports being reopened, people asking questions about Halcyon again. The Pentagon sent investigators last month. That made Holt pause. His eyes sharpened. "Investigators?" Lewis nodded. "A retired intelligence officer went public about missing classified gear from that They think some of it resurfaced on the black market." For the first time, Holt's calm cracked. He stepped closer. "What kind of gear?" "Encrypted comes. Prototype optics. Stuff that was never logged as recovered." Lewis hesitated. "They want anyone who served on that mission to testify." "I can't," Holt said flatly. "Why not?" "Because if I open my mouth, more names get buried." Lewis frowned. "Sir, if what they're saying is true, someone's selling government tech. You could clear your name and protect your men's memory." Holt's gaze drifted to the memorial wall visible through the glass doors. "Their memory doesn't need clearing. It needs silence." Before Lewis could answer, General Douglas appeared behind them. "Colonel Holt," he said. "A word." Holt turned slowly. Douglas's face was unreadable. "In my office," Douglas said. Inside the general's office, blinds drawn, the air was heavy with the smell of paper and brass polish. Douglas closed the door and gestured for Holt to sit. "He didn't use still don't follow orders easily," Douglas muttered. Holt stayed standing. "Why am I here?" Douglas exhaled through his nose. "Because the past doesn't stay buried forever. Washington's breathing down my neck about Halcyon. They think something went wrong in the chain of command, something bigger than the ambush." "It did go wrong," Holt said. "We were sent in without intel, without backup. You know that." Douglas's eyes flickered. "You think I don't carry that guilt? I signed the deployment order." "Then why call me here now?" Douglas lowered his voice. "Because the same people who buried the mission are trying to rewrite it. They want to turn Halcyon into a case study in tactical failure. They're going to drag your name through the mud, call it negligence, erase everything you did." Holt's jaw clenched. "That's convenient. The dead can't argue." Douglas leaned forward. "That's why you have to. We can clear this if we present the real after-action files. Your field journal, the intercepted transmissions." Holt shook his head slowly. "Those files don't exist anymore." Douglas looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I burned them." Douglas went still. "You what?" After the investigation in '93, Holt said quietly, "I destroyed every classified note, every transmission. Too many men's names were on those pages. Some were still undercover. I wasn't going to hand them over to bureaucrats." Douglas's fist hit the desk softly. "Damn it, Holt, that was evidence." "It was protection," Holt said. For a long time, neither spoke. Only the hum of the ceiling fan filled the room. Finally, Douglas sighed. "You haven't changed." "I did," Holt said, turning toward the door. "That's why I left." "Where will you go now?" Douglas asked. Holt paused. "Back to where it ended." Douglas frowned. "Assar Valley." Holt nodded once. "If someone's digging up ghosts, I'd better make sure they dig up the truth." Outside, the evening sun painted the base gold. Holt walked across the parade field, his shadow stretching long beside him. Ryan stood near the flagpole, hat in hand. When he saw Holt, He straightened. "Sir," he said quietly, I wanted to apologize again. I didn't know." Holt studied him. "Now you do. Learn from it." Ryan nodded, face red. "If you ever need a driver, sir, I'd be honored." Holt smiled faintly. "Be careful what you offer, Corporal. The road I'm on isn't paved." Ryan didn't understand, but he saluted anyway. Holt returned the gesture with quiet grace and kept walking. Toward the base exit, he didn't look back. He never did. 2 days later, Colonel Raymond Holt's sedan rolled along a desolate stretch of highway. Wind lifted dust from the road shoulders, swirling it like old ghosts in the fading sun. The base was hundreds of miles behind him now, but its echo road shotgun the faces, the salutes, the ghosts that had stirred after so many years of silence. A folded piece of paper sat on the passenger seat. It was a declassified fragment of the Halcyon op map, something he'd kept hidden even from the investigation. His finger tapped near a shaded mark labeled Sector 9, Assar Valley Outpost. That was where everything had ended. And, if the rumors were true, where someone had started digging again, at dusk, he pulled into a small, forgotten town nearby, one of those desert places that seemed built for secrets. The motel clerk barely looked up when Holt signed in under a false name. The old veteran unpacked nothing, just sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the worn carpet until the shadows lengthened. His phone buzzed once, a number with no caller ID. He hesitated, then answered. "Colonel Holt." A voice said. It was male, older, but unfamiliar. "You shouldn't have come back here." "Who is this?" "Someone who owes you his life," the voice said. "But others won't see it that way. They're watching the valley." "Who's watching?" Static hissed. Then the line went dead. Holt stared at the phone for a long moment before slipping it into his jacket. He looked out the window. The horizon was a dark line, the desert breathing quietly beyond it. He muttered to himself, "Iron shade, huh? Let's see if there's anything left to shade." The next morning, he drove out toward the ruins of the old outpost. The government had abandoned the area decades ago, but the chain-link fence still stood, rattling in the dry wind. Beyond it, the scorched earth of Assar Valley stretched into silence. He parked near a crumbling watchtower and stepped out. The air smelled like rust and sun-baked metal. Memories pressed in the sound of radio chatter, the roar of gunfire, the last orders he'd given under fire. He walked toward what had been the command shelter. It was half collapsed, buried under sand and silence. But something caught his eye. Fresh tire tracks, barely visible, leading to the entrance. He crouched, touching the prints. 2 vehicles, recent, maybe a week old. Someone had been here. He drew a slow breath and pushed inside the shelter. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of oil. Broken crates lay scattered across the floor. He moved deeper until a faint metallic glint caught the light. A sealed storage locker, the kind used for high-value equipment. He wiped the dust from its surface. Stamped across the metal were faded words. Property of Halcyon Field Unit classified. The lock was new. He frowned. That meant someone had sealed it recently, before he could decide whether to pry it open. A noise came from outside, the crunch of gravel, footsteps approaching. Holt moved silently to the corner, peering through a crack in the wall. A black SUV had pulled up beside his car. 2 men in civilian clothes stepped out, moving with military precision. One carried a sidearm low at his hip, confirmed his plate. One said, "He's here orders. Retrieve the package. If he resists..." The second man didn't finish the sentence, but his hand brushed the gun. Holt's pulse stayed even. He reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for a small leather pouch, a relic of his old tradecraft. Inside was a folded piece of reflective glass the size of a coin, used for signaling back in recon days. He slipped it toward the doorway, catching a shard of sunlight, and angled it sharply. The flash reflected off the SUV mirror. One of the men turned his head at the glint, just long enough for Holt to step from the shadow and strike. His movements were slow but deliberate, efficient. One hand gripped the first man's wrist, the other twisted his forearm just enough to make him drop the weapon. The man staggered. Holt shoved him aside and faced the second, who froze at the sight of the veteran's calm stare. "Who sent you?" Holt asked. The man didn't answer. His jaw clenched. Holt sighed. "You're too young to remember Halcyon, aren't you?" He didn't wait for an answer. He stepped back, letting both men retreat toward their car. "Tell your employer," he said evenly, "if they're going to dig up my war, they'd better be ready to face the men they buried with it." The men didn't argue. They got into their SUV and sped away, kicking dust into the air. That night, Holt sat on the hood of his car, staring at the desert stars. He knew what would come next: surveillance, threats, the slow tightening of the noose around the past. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. 12 faces, smiling in desert light, uniforms dusty but proud. The last photo taken before Halcyon went dark. He touched one face, a young soldier barely 20. Underneath, written in faded ink, "M. Sanders comes." He whispered, "You were supposed to destroy the transmissions, kid." But the fresh lock on that crate told him Sanders hadn't. Maybe someone else had them now. Back at Fort Harling, Commander Lewis stood in General Douglas's office, holding a new report. "Sir," he said grimly, "satellite imagery shows movement in Assar Valley. 2 unregistered SUVs, 1 sedan. I think Holt's there." Douglas's eyes narrowed. He shouldn't have gone alone. Lewis hesitated. "He's not just visiting the past, is he?" Douglas's gaze drifted to the window. "No, son. He's trying to protect it." By dawn, the desert had cooled enough for mist to roll low over the Assar Valley floor. Colonel Holt stood where the sand met the ruins, a faint radio hum echoing from the shelter. He'd worked through the night, bypassing the lock on the storage crate with an old field trick involving a carbon blade and steady hands. The latch clicked open at sunrise. Inside the crate, beneath layers of tarpaulin, lay a compact transmitter, dull silver edges scorched. On its face, a faded emblem: Halcyon Field Relay 7B classified. Holt ran his hand along the side panel. The markings were familiar. This was the same model used in Halcyon's blackout operation. It should have been destroyed decades ago. He pressed a switch. A faint light blinked to life, and with it, a flicker of sound. Static. A voice. "Sector 9 compromised. Evac all non-essential units. Iron Shade remains in control. Repeat, Iron Shade." The recording cut off abruptly. Holt froze. That voice, young, breathless, clipped with adrenaline, it was unmistakable. Private Michael Sanders. Killed in action, or so the reports said. He lowered his head, the air heavy with ghosts. Someone had kept this recording alive all these years. Someone who wanted it found. He took the transmitter to a small diner in the nearest town, the kind where coffee never got warm and the waitress didn't ask questions. The place smelled of bacon grease and burnt toast. Holt sat in a corner booth, setting up a portable power cell and patching the transmitter through a tablet. The faint hum drew curious glances, but the few locals kept their distance. He looked like any other worn traveler with old equipment and older eyes. He scrubbed through the transmission data, fragments of code, timestamps, and what looked like fragments of GPS pings. They weren't random. They were coordinates. He jotted them on a napkin. The last coordinate ended somewhere deep inside Fort Harlington's restricted zone. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he said quietly to himself, "They buried the truth right under their own flag." Back on base, Commander Lewis was already uneasy. He had been monitoring digital noise spikes since Holt's disappearance. When a strange transmission signature appeared on the classified frequency range, identical to the old Halcyon encryption, he knew exactly whose hands it was in. He stormed into General Douglas's office again. "Sir, it's him." Holtz reactivated one of the old transmitters. Douglas didn't look surprised. "Then he's closer to the truth than we wanted him to be." Lewis frowned. "You mean than you wanted him to be?" Douglas's silence was answer enough. The general finally said, "You have no idea what Halcyon was, son. The operation didn't just go dark. It was erased. And if Holt finds the final log, the one marked Iron Shade, this entire command structure will burn." Lewis's jaw tightened. "Then maybe it should." Douglas gave him a hard look. "That's your former CO you're talking about. And your career." Lewis leaned forward. "Sir, with all due respect, I'd rather lose my career than lose my conscience." He turned and walked out, leaving Douglas staring at the desk, the weight of old decisions pressing down like sand on a grave. That night, Holt followed the coordinates. He slipped past the fence under a moonless sky, the desert silent except for the whisper of his boots in the dust. The final coordinate led him to Hangar 12, a rusted dome sealed since the Cold War days. The gate lock was newer military issue. He exhaled through his nose. "So this is where you've been hiding, old friend." He pushed the gate open. Inside, the hangar stretched into darkness, filled with decommissioned vehicles and crates marked obsolete. A faint red light blinked from a console near the far wall, the same blinking pattern he'd seen on the transmitter. He approached slowly, hand brushing the surface. The system was still powered. He pressed one key. Screens flickered to life, displaying data logs from Operation Halcyon, mission debriefs, troop rotations, and casualty reports. But one file was locked. Ironshade_final.bin. He bypassed security using his old credentials. The system hesitated, then opened the file. The log was short, just one entry. "This is Captain Douglas, commanding officer of Halcyon Field Unit. If this is being recorded, we've failed to contain the breach. Command has ordered us to terminate Iron Shade and all personnel exposed to it. That includes civilians. I repeat, civilians. I am overriding those orders. This operation is no longer about loyalty, it's about humanity. I'll take responsibility." The recording cut. The silence after was deafening. Holt's hands clenched at his sides. He whispered, "Douglas." All these years, the man had buried the truth not to protect himself, but to protect the men who refused to follow a slaughter order. And Holt, he'd been carrying the guilt for decades, thinking they'd failed the mission, when in truth, Douglas had rewritten the ending at his own cost. The sound of tires outside broke his thoughts. He turned. A spotlight flared through the hangar windows, multiple vehicles surrounding the structure. He recognized the convoy pattern instantly. Internal Task Force. Retrieval Team. He killed the lights and slipped behind a stack of crates. "Fan out," a voice barked from outside. Targets inside. "Orders are to recover the file, neutralize if necessary." Holt exhaled slowly. No surprise. He had expected this. He pulled a small flash drive from his jacket, plugged it into the terminal, and began downloading the data. The bar filled slowly. Outside, boots crunched closer. He muttered, "Come on, come on." The download hit 98%. Then the hangar door creaked open. A silhouette stepped in, Commander Lewis Holt. He called, "You need to move. They're coming." Holt turned. "You followed me?" Lewis held up his hands. "Not to stop you, to help you. You're right about Halcyon, about Douglas, but if you don't leave now, they'll erase everything you included." The download beeped complete. Holt yanked the drive free and pocketed it. He nodded once. "Then let's make sure they can't." Together they slipped through a side exit, disappearing into the desert shadows as headlights sliced through the hangar. Behind them, a security officer found the console still glowing. "Sir," the officer radioed, "the file's been copied." A voice on the other end hissed. "Then find him before he broadcasts it, at dawn, far beyond the reach of base patrols." Holt and Lewis parked on a cliff overlooking the valley. The horizon bled orange and gold. The air was still. Lewis watched the old veteran set up a portable comms array. "You're really going to send it?" Holt smiled faintly. Truth belongs to more than a few uniforms. He connected the flash drive and hit transmit. The signal pulsed, bouncing off relay towers, spreading the old truth back into the world that had forgotten it. Lewis asked quietly, "What will they do to us?" Holt looked at him, steady.com, free for the first time in years. "Maybe nothing," he said. "Or maybe they'll come. But at least now, they'll have to come with the truth in the open." The transmission light blinked green. Signal sent. Holt watched the sun crest over the ridge, the long shadow of the valley fading behind him. "Iron Shade," he murmured, "mission complete." The broadcast rippled through every corner of the defense network, like a ghost returning to its post. Encrypted files bearing the Halcyon insignia surfaced on military servers across the globe before command could shut them down. Within hours, journalists were buzzing, veterans groups were lighting up forums, and the words "Iron Shade" began trending across encrypted channels where old soldiers still spoke in code. Inside Fort Harlington, alarms screamed. General Douglas stood by his window, the desert sun washing over his wrinkled face. He had expected it to reckoning. He didn't flinch when the MPs stormed his office. "Sir, you're under review for classified breach under Section 12. He cut them off with a calm wave. It's time someone looked at the truth. As they escorted him out, he didn't fight it. For the first time in years, his conscience felt lighter than the stars stitched on his shoulder. Holt and Lewis didn't stop until they reached a derelict airstrip to our south. The runway was cracked, littered with rusted barrels, and the skeleton of a forgotten hangar. Lewis had procured a small cargo plane through an old friend. Nothing official, nothing traceable. The world was about to change again, and they needed to stay one step ahead. They refueled in silence. The old man's hands moved with muscle memory, calm, deliberate. Lewis finally broke the quiet. You knew he'd take the fall, didn't you? Holt's eyes didn't leave the horizon. Douglas carried this for decades. All I did was hand it back to him. Lewis shook his head. He still saved your file, Holt, the one they tried to erase. Your name's been classified dead for 30 years. The veteran smiled faintly. Then I guess being dead has its advantages. They both laughed, the kind of quiet, tired laugh men share after surviving something too big to explain. Back at the base, chaos reigned. Officers ran through corridors, shredding files, closing ports. But it was too late. Every soldier who'd ever served under Operation Halcyon was watching that old footage leak. Across their feeds, young men in sandstorms, unmarked graves, orders disobeyed to save civilians. Faces long thought lost, voices long forgotten. He disobeyed a kill order. He saved 50 civilians. He was erased for it. You could almost hear the base's heartbeat stop. In the command hall, younger officers stood frozen as the image looped. The same man who had walked their grounds. 2 days ago, insulted and dismissed, was the reason they still had a flag to salute. By dusk, Holt and Lewis landed on a coastal strip outside San Diego. The air smelled of salt and jet fuel, freedom's perfume. As they stepped down from the plane, a line of vehicles approached. Military SUVs, but no weapons drawn. The lead door opened. A young Navy captain, dressed whites, sharp as a blade, stepped out. He approached slowly, his face unreadable. Holt squared himself, ready for whatever came next. The captain stopped a few paces away. Are you the man they called Iron Shade? Holt's answer was soft but firm. Once, a long time ago. The captain nodded. His voice was steady, but the tremor beneath it betrayed awe. Sir, I owe my commission to the people you saved. My grandfather was one of those civilians. He turned toward his convoy and barked attention. Every officer there, 15 in total, snapped to salute. Boots clicked, hands raised. The desert wind carried nothing but silence, but it was the kind of silence that roared. Holt didn't return the salute immediately. He just looked at them, his eyes wet with something between pride and grief. Finally, he raised his hand, slow, deliberate. The salute of a man not demanding respect, but acknowledging it. For a long time, no one moved. Later, Lewis found him sitting on a crate near the docks, staring at the water. The sun had melted into a crimson smear across the horizon. You did it, Lewis said quietly. Holt's voice was distant. No. We did what should have been done a long time ago. He paused, then smiled faintly. Funny thing about truth, you can bury it, rewrite it, even burn it. But sooner or later, it walks right back through the gate. Lewis looked at him, this man who'd carried the weight of nations in his silence. So what now, Iron Shade? The old veteran chuckled softly. Now, I go home. I've got a porch that's been missing me since '92. They both laughed again, this time without the HEAV-ness. As night fell, Holt walked alone down the pier. A soft breeze tugged at his gray jacket. The water shimmered with moonlight, each ripple whispering a different memory. Faces, names, voices. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small metal tag, and read the engraving under the rust. Iron Shade, for those who stood when the world fell silent. He set it gently on the railing, then turned away. Somewhere behind him, the waves carried it out to sea. A final salute to the ghosts who never came home. The camera of memory would linger there, on the floating tag, before fading to black.